As the owner finished arranging the display, his phone buzzed with a message. The mayor's office wanted to recognize the store's community impact with an award. He smiled, thinking about how far they'd come from that tense Tuesday morning. The store's morning playlist filled the space with gentle jazz, the same music that had played that day. But now it felt less like background music and more like a soundtrack to something meaningful. Something that went beyond retail, beyond commerce, beyond the day-to-day of running a store. A young man walked past the window, then stopped and came back, staring at the displays. The owner recognized that look, someone wondering if they belonged in a place like this. Without hesitation, he walked to the door and opened it with a warm smile. "Welcome to Style & Co," he said. "Come on in, everyone's welcome here." And he meant it more than ever before, because sometimes the hardest moments can lead to the most beautiful changes. Sometimes all it takes is one conversation, one moment of understanding to start something that touches an entire community. This wasn't just a store anymore. It was proof that change was possible, that understanding could grow from confrontation, that beauty could emerge from difficult moments. And every morning, as the sun streamed through those windows, it illuminated not just a business, but a beacon of hope and transformation in the community. The owner's office was exactly what you'd expect from someone who paid attention to every detail of their business. Warm lighting softened the modern furniture, and a wall of photos showed the store's journey from construction to grand opening. A degree in business management hung beside design certificates, telling the story of years of preparation and hard work. The woman sat stiffly in one of the comfortable guest chairs, her designer bag clutched in her lap like a shield. Her eyes kept moving between the photos on the wall and the man sitting across from her. The business card she'd been given lay on the desk between them, a small piece of paper that had shattered all her assumptions. "Would you like some water?" the owner asked, his voice gentle but professional. A glass pitcher sat on a side table, gathering light from the window. It was the same pitcher he used during vendor meetings and staff interviews. She nodded slightly, and he poured 2 glasses. The simple act seemed to break some of the tension in the room. The sound of the store's usual business filtered through the door, life going on as normal outside this bubble of uncomfortable recognition. "I've owned this store for 6 months now," he began, settling back in his chair. "Before that, I spent 15 years working my way up through every position in luxury retail you can imagine. Started folding sweaters at the mall when I was in college." He smiled slightly at the memory. "Back then, I had a lot of days like today." The woman's hands tightened around her glass. "I didn't," she started, then stopped, seemingly unsure how to continue. "Mean to cause a scene," he finished for her. "I believe you. But that's part of what we need to talk about." He leaned forward slightly. "You know, when I was designing this store, I had a very specific vision. I wanted to create a space where everyone, and I mean everyone, would feel welcome." His eyes moved to a particular photo on the wall, the store on opening day, his parents standing proudly beside him. "My mother taught me something important when I was young. She said that change happens one conversation at a time. That's why we're having this talk right now." The woman's shoulders dropped slightly, the defensive posture beginning to fade. She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I've never been on this side of the conversation before." "Most people haven't," he replied quietly. "That's why these moments matter." He gestured to the store beyond his office window. "Every day, people walk through those doors. They all bring their own stories, their own assumptions, their own experiences. My job isn't just to sell them clothes, it's to make them feel valued." A noise from the store made them both look toward the door. Through the window, they could see customers being helped by staff members, the normal flow of retail life continuing. The woman watched a young sales associate carefully wrapping a purchase, providing the same excellent service to every customer. "I have to ask," the owner said, turning back to her. "What was your first thought when you saw me arranging those displays?" She looked down at her hands, her face flushing again. I just assumed," her voice trailed off, "that I didn't belong here," he finished gently. "That someone who looks like me, dressed like me, couldn't possibly own a store like this." Tears welled up in her eyes. "I'm so embarrassed," she whispered. "I've shopped at luxury stores for years. I pride myself on being worldly, educated. But today, I proved I'm none of those things." The owner reached for a tissue box and offered it to her. Actually, he said, I'd argue that what happens next proves who you are. We all have blind spots. The question is, what do we do when they're revealed? Sunlight streamed through the office window, catching the store's logo on the wall. The woman's eyes followed the light, taking in the carefully chosen design. You really did think of everything, she said softly. Had to, he replied with a small smile. When you've spent years being judged, you learn to leave no detail to chance. Every element of this store was chosen to tell a story, one of welcome, of quality, of respect. He stood up and walked to the wall of photos, touching one that showed him as a young sales associate. You know what's interesting? The day this picture was taken, something very similar to today happened to me. But the owner of that store didn't take the time to have this conversation. He just asked me to leave. The woman's breath caught audibly. What did you do? I promised myself that if I ever owned my own store, I'd do things differently. He turned back to face her. That's why we're here right now. Because sometimes the hardest conversations are the most important ones. The business card caught the store's soft lighting as the owner held it out, its gold lettering gleaming against the cream-colored paper. Time seemed to slow down as he stepped forward, his movements deliberate and calm despite the storm of emotions inside him. The woman's eyes darted between his face and his extended hand, confusion replacing her previous certainty. I believe, he said quietly, his voice steady and clear, this might help clear things up. The card trembled slightly in his hand, not from fear, but from the weight of what this moment represented. Not just for him, but for every person who'd ever been judged before being known. The security guard stood perfectly still, watching the scene unfold. He'd seen the owner handle difficult situations before, but this was different. This was personal. The young sales associate had her hands clasped together, holding her breath like she was watching the climax of a movie. The woman hesitated before taking the card, her manicured fingers closing around it as if she expected it to bite. Her eyes scanned the text, then darted to the store's logo on the wall, then back to the card. The color drained from her face as realization dawned. Style & Co., she read aloud, her voice barely a whisper. Owner and chief executive. Her voice traveled off as she looked up at him, really seeing him for the first time. The store's logo behind the counter seemed to mock her assumptions, its elegant design matching the one on the card perfectly. The silence in the store was deafening. A few customers who had been pretending not to watch were now openly staring. The owner could see their expressions in the wall mirrors, some embarrassed, others satisfied, all riveted to the unfolding scene. The woman started, then stopped. Her perfectly composed facade cracked, uncertainty creeping into her features. The phone in her hand, the one she'd been so ready to use to call the police, now hung limply at her side. The owner felt a lifetime of experiences surge through him. The proud day he'd signed the lease, the nights spent planning every detail of the store's layout, the joy of opening day. But also the countless times he'd been followed in stores, the suspicious glances, the assumptions. All of it had led to this moment. The store opens at 9 a.m. every morning, he said, his voice gentle but firm. I'm usually here by 7:30. I like to arrange the displays myself. It helps me keep track of our inventory and ensures everything meets our standards. He gestured to the perfectly arranged accessories he'd been working on earlier. Those Italian leather wallets you were concerned about? I personally selected them during my last buying trip to Milan. The woman's face had turned from pale to bright red. Her designer bag, which she'd been clutching so protectively, now hung awkwardly at her side. The security guard shifted his weight, hiding what might have been a smile. I didn't, she stammered, looking desperately around the store as if searching for an escape route. The same space she'd been trying to protect now seemed to be closing in on her. The young sales associate had tears in her eyes again, but this time they were different, tears of pride in her boss, in how he was handling this moment. Other staff members stood straighter, watching their owner with a mix of respect and admiration. Your concern for the store's security is appreciated, the owner continued, maintaining his professional tone. We take great pride in protecting our merchandise. In fact, I personally designed our security system, including the cameras you're standing under right now. He gestured upward, where a small, discreet camera was indeed recording everything. A customer near the Wintercoats let out a small "oh" of recognition, probably remembering their own assumptions when they'd first walked in. The woman's eyes darted to the security guard, perhaps hoping for some support, but found none. The owner's phone buzzed again in his pocket, that persistent reminder of his normal, everyday life continuing despite this extraordinary moment. He thought about his family, his journey, all the people who'd supported him and believed in him. Their faith had helped him build this place, and their wisdom had prepared him for moments like this. "Would you like to step into my office?" he asked quietly. "I think we should talk." The invitation hung in the air, heavy with meaning. This wasn't just about embarrassment or vindication. It was an opportunity, a chance to turn an ugly moment into something meaningful. The moment hung in the air like suspended glass, fragile and ready to shatter. The owner's fingers touched the embossed business cards in his pocket. Cards he'd spent hours designing, making sure they captured the perfect balance of elegance and approachability. How many times had he handed them out with pride? Now one was about to become part of a very different kind of interaction. The security guard shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. His hand rested casually on his radio, more from habit than necessity. Through the store's windows, curious passers-by had started to slow their pace, drawn to the scene unfolding inside the usually peaceful boutique. "I really must insist," the woman was saying, her voice carrying that particular tone of someone who was used to getting her way. "I've been shopping at luxury stores for 20 years. I know what I'm talking about." She gestured again at the owner's casual clothing, his comfortable jeans and simple black t-shirt becoming Exhibit A in her case against him. The young sales associate had moved closer to her manager's office, probably wondering if she should call for backup. Other staff members were frozen in place, watching the scene with a mix of disbelief and second-hand embarrassment. They'd all been trained on handling difficult customers, but nothing had prepared them for watching their boss being profiled in his own store. The owner felt his hands trembling slightly, not from fear or embarrassment, but from a complex mix of emotions that had built up over years of similar experiences. He thought about the lease he'd signed for this space, how his hands had shaken then too, but from excitement and pride. Now here he was, being treated like an intruder in the very space he'd created. "Ma'am," the security guard tried again, "I think there's something you should." "No, please," she cut him off, raising her hand. "I know what I saw. He's been touching all the expensive items, moving things around, watching everyone who comes in. I'm just trying to protect your store's interests." She emphasized the word "your" as if to distance herself from any responsibility for what was unfolding. A small crowd had gathered outside now. The owner could see the restaurant manager from next door watching through the window, concern evident on his face. They'd just had lunch together last week, discussing plans for a joint holiday promotion. The owner's phone buzzed again in his pocket, probably his mother checking on the plans for Sunday dinner. She'd always told him to hold his head high, no matter what. "Your dignity," she'd say, "is not determined by how others treat you, but by how you respond to that treatment." His fingers closed around the business cards. The glossy surface felt cool against his skin, the raised lettering a reminder of everything he'd built. He took a deep breath, remembering all the late nights, the carefully reviewed contracts, the conversations with vendors, the interviews with staff members. Every detail of this store had his fingerprints on it, literally and figuratively. I couldn't help but notice, the woman was now addressing the security guard directly, her voice dripping with assumed authority, that he doesn't even have a name tag like the other staff members. "Isn't that against store policy?" She looked almost triumphant at this observation. The irony of her statement almost made him laugh. He'd actually been the one to design the staff name tags, choosing the font and layout himself. He'd decided not to wear one because he wanted to be accessible to his customers without the formality of a title. The security guard's expression shifted slightly, just enough to show he'd reached his limit with the situation. He opened his mouth to speak, but the owner caught his eye and gave a small shake of his head. This was his store, his situation to handle. The woman had pulled out her phone again, presumably to document what she saw as suspicious behavior. "I really think we need to call the actual police," she was saying, her fingers hovering over the keypad. "I'm not comfortable with how this is being handled." That was the moment he decided to end it. Not with anger, not with accusations, but with the simple truth that had been there all along. He stepped forward, his movement causing the woman to take a startled step back. His hand went to his back pocket, and she watched with wide eyes, probably expecting something very different from the small, cream-colored business card he pulled out. The store had gone completely silent. Even the usual ambient noise of the mall seemed muted, as if the world was holding its breath. The piano music playing overhead hit a particularly poignant note, an accidentally perfect soundtrack for what was about to happen. The irony of her words hit hard. The owner had spent countless hours choosing the store's security system, installing cameras, training staff on loss prevention, all while making sure the atmosphere remained welcoming. He'd wanted to create a space where everyone felt comfortable, regardless of what they wore or how they looked. The young sales associate had tears in her eyes now, clearly distressed by the unfairness of it all. She opened her mouth to speak, probably ready to blurt out the truth, but the owner caught her eye and gave a small shake of his head. He handled this his own way. The woman was still talking, listing her credentials as a frequent luxury shopper and explaining how she could spot suspicious behavior. Each word dug the hole deeper, though she seemed completely unaware of it. The security guard's expression remained professional, but the owner could see the slight tightening around his eyes. The store's music had shifted to a soft piano piece, one of his favorite songs, actually. He'd included it on the playlist because it reminded him of Sunday afternoons at his grandmother's house, where she taught him about dignity in the face of prejudice. Your response to ignorance, she'd say, shows more about your character than their actions show about theirs. Taking a deep breath, he reached into his back pocket, where he always kept a small stack of his business cards. It was time to end this, but not in the way the woman expected. The security guard's steady footsteps echoed through the store as he approached the entrance. The owner knew him well. They'd often share morning coffee before the shops opened, swapping stories about their kids' latest adventures and weekend plans. Today, those friendly chats would prove unexpectedly valuable. The woman was still speaking rapidly into her phone, her voice carrying across the now quieter store. Yes, he's been handling all the expensive items. No, I've been watching him for the past 20 minutes. He's dressed very casually. Yes, I really think someone should check. Other customers had stopped browsing, trying to appear busy while obviously tuning in to the unfolding drama. A young couple who'd been examining winter coats stood frozen, price tags forgotten in their hands. Near the shoe display, an elderly gentleman shook his head slowly, having clearly figured out what was happening. The owner's young sales associate looked like she wanted to sink into the floor. She'd only been working at the store for 3 months, and nothing in her training had prepared her for this situation. Her hands fidgeted with her employee name tag as she struggled with what to do. "Ma'am," she tried again, her voice stronger this time. "If you'll just let me explain." But the woman cut her off with a sharp wave of her hand. No, we need to handle this properly. I've seen how these things go. Better to let security handle it." She straightened her designer blazer as if preparing for an important presentation. The security guard pushed open the glass door, the little bell above it chiming inappropriately cheerfully. The owner had chosen that bell himself, loving how its gentle sound welcomed customers into his space. Now it felt like a soundtrack to this surreal moment. "Good morning," the security guard said, his calm voice carrying authority without aggression. His eyes scanned the scene, taking in the woman's agitated state, the uncomfortable sales associate, and the owner still standing by the accessories display. A flash of recognition crossed his face, quickly replaced by professional neutrality. The woman rushed forward, her heels clicking rapidly against the hardwood floors. "Thank goodness you're here," she said, pointing toward the owner. "That man has been behaving very suspiciously. He's been handling all the expensive merchandise, moving things around, and he's been here since I arrived. I really think you should check." "Ma'am," the security guard began, but she wasn't finished. "I shop at high-end stores all the time," she continued, her voice rising slightly. "I know what belongs and what doesn't. He clearly doesn't fit the profile of your usual clientele." She gestured vaguely at the owner's casual clothes, her meaning crystal clear. The owner felt his phone buzz in his pocket, probably another message from his sister about their mom's upcoming birthday celebration. The ordinary reminder of family life felt strangely out of place in this moment. Here he was, standing in the store he'd built from the ground up, being treated like an intruder while his family planned a party. Several emotions crossed his mind: frustration, anger, exhaustion. But mostly he felt a deep sadness. How many others had faced similar situations? How many talented people had given up on their dreams because of moments like this? The security guard cleared his throat, clearly trying to handle the situation diplomatically. "Ma'am, perhaps we should." No, she interrupted again, her voice taking on an edge of impatience. "I've seen this before. You need to check his ID, make sure he has a reason to be here." "I'm just trying to protect the store's merchandise." Someone needs to take responsibility for security in these places. The morning had started like any other at Style & Co., with a steady stream of customers browsing through the carefully curated collections. The owner was doing what he loved most: arranging a new display of silk scarves and leather accessories, making sure each piece caught the light just right. The soft jazz playing in the background mixed with the gentle murmur of shoppers' conversations, creating that perfect boutique atmosphere he'd always dreamed of. He was just stepping back to examine his work when he felt it, that familiar weight of someone's stare. After 15 years in retail, you develop a sixth sense for these things. Looking up, he caught sight of a woman in the mirror's reflection, standing near the designer handbag section. She was well dressed in what he recognized as last season's designer wear, probably in her mid-40s, with an expensive haircut and a pearl necklace that caught the store's soft lighting. At first, he did what he always did: offered a warm, professional smile and a friendly nod. It was the same courtesy he extended to every customer who walked through his doors. But something felt off. Instead of returning the smile, the woman clutched her designer bag closer to her chest and took a small step backward, her eyes never leaving his movements. He tried to focus on his work, carefully adjusting a display of Italian leather wallets, but he could still feel her watching. Years of experience had taught him exactly what this was, and his heart sank a little. Not today, he thought. Not in my own store. A young sales associate, a bright college student who worked part-time, was helping another customer nearby. The owner could hear her enthusiastically explaining the unique features of their new collection, and he smiled despite his discomfort. He'd hired her because she had that natural ability to make people feel welcome, the same quality he'd prided himself on throughout his career. The woman who'd been watching him began to move, but not toward him. Instead, she made her way to his sales associate, her expensive heels clicking against the hardwood floors. He pretended to be absorbed in his work, but his ears caught the whispered conversation. "Excuse me," the woman's voice was hushed but urgent. "I don't mean to alarm you, but that man over there—" She paused, glancing in his direction. "He seems to be paying very close attention to the expensive merchandise. Has he been here long? Do you know him?" The sales associate's voice carried a note of confusion. "Ma'am, I—" But the woman wasn't finished. "I've been watching him, and his behavior seems suspicious. He's been handling all the expensive items, and he's dressed so casually." The judgment in her voice was clear as crystal. The owner continued his work, his movements deliberately slow and professional, though his shoulders had tensed. The luxury watch on his wrist, a gift from his parents when he'd opened the store, suddenly felt heavy. How many times had he faced this? Even after all these years, after all his success, some things hadn't changed. The sales associate tried again. "Ma'am, actually—" "I really think we should call security," the woman interrupted, her voice growing louder. "Better safe than sorry. I shop at high-end stores all the time, and you can never be too careful these days." She was already pulling out her phone, manicured fingers hovering over the keypad. The store's peaceful atmosphere had shifted. Other customers were beginning to notice the commotion, some throwing curious glances their way. The owner felt his face grow warm, not from embarrassment, he'd long since moved past that, but from a deep, tired frustration. This was his store. He'd picked out every piece of merchandise, designed the layout, chosen the paint colors, hired every employee. Yet here he was, being treated like an intruder in his own space. He could have said something right then, could have walked over and ended the situation with a simple introduction, but years of experience had taught him to handle these moments carefully. One wrong move, one harsh word, and he'd be the one who caused a scene in a high-end boutique. The irony wasn't lost on him. The woman was now speaking in rapid, hushed tones into her phone, describing what she saw as suspicious behavior. The young sales associate looked desperately between her and the owner, clearly distressed by the situation. Other staff members had noticed too, their faces showing a mix of anger and disbelief. The morning's peaceful atmosphere had evaporated completely. The soft jazz playing overhead now felt like an odd backdrop to the scene unfolding. Through the front windows, he could see the shopping center's security guard approaching. Well, he thought, straightening his shoulders, this should be interesting. The early morning sunlight streamed through the windows of Style & Co., casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. The store wouldn't open for another hour, but its owner was already hard at work, just like every other morning. He moved with purpose through the quiet space, his footsteps echoing in the peaceful silence that would soon be filled with the bustle of eager shoppers. 6 months ago, this dream had finally become reality. After 15 years of working his way up through every position in luxury retail, from folding clothes and manning fitting rooms to managing high-end departments, he had finally opened his own boutique. The journey hadn't been easy. There were countless late nights spent reviewing business plans, meetings with skeptical loan officers, and moments of doubt that kept him awake at 3 a.m. But he had persevered, driven by a vision that went beyond just selling clothes. He wanted to create an experience, a space where everyone felt welcome and valued. Today, like every morning, he had arrived just as the sky was beginning to lighten. His mom always told him, "Success comes to those who rise before the sun," and those words had become his daily motivation. The morning routine had become almost meditative, unlocking the heavy front door, disabling the security system, and breathing in the familiar scent of leather and fresh fabric that filled the store. He paused at the window display, tilting his head as he studied the arrangement of items. The display needed something different. Wearing his favorite worn jeans and a comfortable black t-shirt, his typical early morning work clothes, he began rearranging the mannequins with practiced ease. A subtle adjustment to the blazer's collar here, a slight turn of a shoe there. Every detail mattered. His phone buzzed in his pocket, probably another message from his sister teasing him about working too hard again. She didn't understand that these quiet morning moments were his favorite part of the day. This was when he could focus on the creative aspects of the business before emails and vendor calls demanded his attention. As he worked, he caught his reflection in the window and smiled, remembering his first job in retail. He had been so nervous then, a young guy just trying to prove himself in an industry that didn't always feel welcoming to someone who looked like him. Now here he was, arranging displays in his own store. The thought still gave him goosebumps. The window display soon began to take shape. He stepped back, admiring how the morning light played off the carefully arranged items. The blue blazer he positioned just so captured the essence of professional sophistication, while the casual wear beside it added an approachable touch. This was what he loved about fashion, its power to tell stories and make people feel confident. His watch showed 8:15 a.m., time to start preparing for the day ahead. He headed to the back office, reviewing the day's schedule. There was a new shipment arriving at 10, a team meeting at 2, and several regular customers expected to stop by. The store had quickly gained a reputation for its personalized service and thoughtfully curated collection. Walking through the aisles, he straightened items that didn't need straightening, more out of love for his work than necessity. Each rack told the story, carefully selected pieces that he'd chosen himself, remembering the diverse needs of his growing clientele. From young professionals buying their first serious work wardrobe to long-time luxury shoppers, he wanted everyone to find something that made them feel special. The store's lights gradually came on, section by section, bringing the space to life. He adjusted the music playlist. Another personal touch he insisted on curating himself. The soft melody filled the space, creating the perfect atmosphere for the day ahead. Everything had to be just right. As the morning progressed, he moved to the accessories section, his attention caught by a new collection of leather goods that had arrived yesterday. While arranging them, he thought about his father's words from years ago. "It's not just about selling things, son, it's about understanding people." Those words had shaped his entire approach to business. The front door would open in 15 minutes. Soon, the peaceful morning solitude would give way to the energetic rhythm of a busy boutique. But for now, in these quiet moments, he took pride in what he built. This store was more than just a business. It was proof that dreams could become reality with enough determination, regardless of the obstacles along the way. Looking around at his creation, he straightened his shoulders and smiled. Another day was about to begin at Style & Co., and he couldn't wait to see what it would bring. Little did he know, this particular Tuesday would test him in ways he never expected.